Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today, we continue and we conclude our venue preview series for Phish's 2025 September run with a look at the Hampton Coliseum in Virginia. I don't often get nervous or intimidated on this podcast, but occasionally a topic or a show, or in today's case, a venue, seems too big or too well known or too respected to sum up in one episode. Luckily, today's episode features the best guest possible to help pull the weight for one of the most revered venues in Phish history, my friend Greg from Virginia. Greg has participated in Attendance Bias before, mostly to help with recaps and show notes, but today he gives us the full-fledged history and a preview of the Hampton Coliseum, a venue that is so simple on the inside, yet it holds tremendous weight and history, not just for Phish, but for all of rock history, going back to the late 1960s. Granted, Phish isn't the first band to leave their mark on the Mothership, but at this point they've played over 20 shows there, including some of the most important of their career. So you can see why it's a bit scary for me to tackle this beloved venue when I began listening and taking notes for this episode. But I hope that Greg and I did well enough to get you pumped for Phish's 3 shows, September 19th, 20th, and 21st at Hampton Coliseum. Let's join Greg to talk about Colonial Williamsburg, NASA, and the best way to the beach as we preview and review Phish's history at the Hampton Coliseum. Greg, welcome back to Attendance Bias. How have you been?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Brian. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you again.
I'm happy to have you here to talk to me, but also more specifically to talk about Hampton, Virginia, Hampton Roads, and to get people excited or at least prepared for Phish's 3 nights at the Hampton Coliseum this coming September 19th, 20th, and 21st. 3 nights at the Mothership this year. Before we get started on anything, I want to ask you, since you live fairly nearby, what was your reaction when Phish released these dates?
Well, and my initial reaction was like, damn it, because I'm going to be at a wedding in Colorado that weekend, and I knew this was going to happen. Like all year I've been saying they're going to play at Hampton. It's going to be during this weekend. So I am not going to make the first 2 nights this go around, but I did change my travel plans to come back. So I'll be there at least for the Sunday show. And based on my experiences at Hampton, that's the one I would want to be at if I had to pick it.
All right, good. I'm glad you're not missing out entirely, saying that with due respect to the couple who's engaged.
Yeah, that's okay. I didn't think it was appropriate to ask them to change their wedding, and I'm sure. So it's all good. But, it's been a long time coming. It's been 7 years since they've been there, and every year the rumors start to circulate that, they're going to be there. Last year there was talk about, they're going to do a Halloween there, which I don't think will ever happen. But I'm glad that they're back, and I want to see them start to come back to Southeastern Virginia more often, so that I can sleep in my own bed at the end of the night.
That's all we're hoping for. Everyone just wants to sleep in their own bed.
Makes a big difference the older we get.
So, Greg, you've been on this podcast previously, mostly for recaps, right? After 3-night runs. I think we did one for Mexico, maybe for Atlantic City one year. So you're no stranger to this, but I don't think we've ever done a proper introduction in terms of a lightning round or anything like that. So in relation to these 3 shows coming up in September, what is your history in Hampton, Virginia, or Hampton Roads? Like, what's your relationship to the city and the area?
Yeah, so I grew up in Virginia Beach, and Hampton Roads is comprised of 7 cities, and they're right next to each other. So you literally can be at an intersection where when you cross through the light, you go from Virginia Beach to Norfolk. And Hampton, being home of the Coliseum, which is really the only thing of real interest there, at least when I was growing up, that was the place where we went for the circus. In high school and college, I saw a lot of concerts there. It was one of 2 big venues, the other one being the Scope in Norfolk, where people would go. And so, that was kind of how I knew Hampton. We drove past it. Like, the Coliseum was always a landmark because my dad kept his sailboat in a little town called Poquoson that is adjacent to Hampton. So we drove past it on weekends all the time. And I didn't know it was the Mothership back then. Every time we drove past, it was like, hey, is the circus coming to town?
And we'll get into this a little bit later. To me, that sounds like me growing up and my relationship to the Nassau Coliseum.
Hmm.
That's where you go for like entertainment purposes. But the town that the Nassau Coliseum sits in, Uniondale, with apologies to my fellow Long Islanders, not that much else that makes it a destination.
Yeah, it's the same with Hampton too. Like it's not a bad town, but I mean, nothing in southeastern Virginia is walkable, and there's no public transportation. So, there's a lot of traffic everywhere that, there are some kind of sketchy areas once you get away from the Coliseum area. So there's just not a lot of reason to go there, if there's not an event happening.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Is there anything that makes Hampton unique as a city? Like, would any Phish fan know about Hampton, Virginia, if the Coliseum didn't exist?
Yeah, if they didn't live there, probably not. I mean, it does have a lot of history. I mean, it is one of the first settlements. I did a little bit of research too because I got to come up with something interesting about this place. It is the first continuous English speaking settlement in North America. So, Jamestown being the first settlement is not far from there, but Hampton itself was, it was the port city. It's, a lot of stuff happened there. There's a lot of history through the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the War of 1812. NASA has long had a training facility there and a research facility in Hampton. So there's stuff there, but you probably wouldn't know about it unless you were. I mean, you probably didn't learn about it unless you were here and learning local history in grade school. I don't think that a Phish fans would ever know this town if it wasn't for the Coliseum, and probably music fans in general wouldn't.
Well, for any fans who are coming to Hampton for these shows toward the middle or end of September, but let's say they've never been there or they've never been to the Coliseum, what are some things that they should do, places they should maybe go to eat, or things they should seek out during the day? Let's say they're early risers, even after
Mhm.
a late night show. Any suggestions for people to do, see, or eat or visit while they're here during the day before they go back to the hotel or their Airbnb to get show ready?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is a lot of cool stuff depending on how much time you want to commit to it. And if you get in a day early or stay in an extra day, it's worth a trip to the oceanfront in Virginia Beach if you don't, live near an ocean and go there regularly already. That's about a 50-minute drive to an hour, depending on traffic. Right now, it's a little tough to get to the other side of the water. So Hampton sits on like a peninsula, so there are bridge and tunnel connectors to the south side of Hampton Roads. And right now, the main one of those is undergoing a massive construction project, so the traffic is kind of bad. If you just want to stay on that side and hit some quick hits, the Virginia Air and Space Center is close by. I think it's about 10 minutes from the Coliseum, and there's some cool stuff there. They got exhibits where they've got like a lunar lander and some of the capsules from like Apollo and Gemini missions. And they have an IMAX theater. I went online and looked, and it didn't look like they have anything scheduled for that weekend yet, but I don't know if that's just because they haven't built the schedule. There's also NASA Langley Research Center. It's a little bit further away, and it's in the complete opposite direction of the Air and Space Center. And I don't think you can actually go on it, but it's super cool if you're like, a space nerd like me to just go look at it, because they have these like massive wind tunnels. And I mean, these things are many, many stories high, and you can drive up pretty much right next to them where they do the aeronautics testing. They've also got the impact facility where they've got a big tower where they will take like airplane fuselages and things and like drop them nose first into the ground to see make their design assessments for safety purposes and things like that. And that thing is really cool because if you go out on the bay, you can see it from miles and miles away. So as growing up when we would go sailing, that was always like a landmark for us when we knew we were getting close to Hampton. See what else? If you're a history buff, Colonial Williamsburg and the Jamestown settlements are a little over a half hour away, and those are pretty cool to see if you're into early American history. They still got parts of the Colonial Williamsburg where everybody's dressed up in like the garb of the time, and they've got like little demonstrations and things like that that kind of tell you what it was like to live back then.
Yeah, they have like the little teepees and the canoes, right? Still set up that you could sit in and like poke your head into. I
Oh
don't know.
yeah.
My wife and I kind of have the intellectual curiosity of a bright fourth grader on a field trip. So when we go on these trips, like that's the stuff we're seeking out.
Yeah, it is a cool place. I mean, I think it's one of the things that if you live in this area, you take for granted because you went in school and you don't need to do it over and over again.
Right. Like I've
But
never been to the top of the Empire State Building. It's just always been there. I have no
yeah,
reason to check it out, but a lot of people who come visit, that's like the first thing they want to do.
yeah, exactly, exactly. I think too, if you're into thrill rides, the Busch Gardens is like less than a half hour from where the Coliseum is. And they opened a lot of new coasters in the last few years. And really that park is beautiful. Like it's worth going there just to walk through in September because the local schools will have already started. That'll be a place that you can get in and not have to sit through really long lines too. So that may be a good fun thing for folks to do.
And I know from Hampton Coliseum, I've only been there once, and I'll chime in a little later when we go over Phish's history at the venue. I stayed a little while away, and then I had to kind of visit my friends during the day because there seemed to be a lot of hotels and stuff immediately surrounding the venue. So people who are starting to make their plans now, where should they stay? Because like there's a lot of Reddit forums and stuff like that about the nuts and bolts of attending a show at Hampton.
Yeah, I've answered a lot of Reddit questions over the last month or so, and especially from people that are saying, it's my first time coming. Where should I stay? And unfortunately, you're usually telling them, well, you missed out probably on the opportunity to stay, close enough to walk to the show. And because there are hotels right there, as you know, and that area has changed a lot since, the early 2000s, where it was kind of run down around the venue. They've built it up. There's a new convention center there, so they've upgraded some of the hotels. They've also reduced the size of the parking lot a little bit. I would recommend to people, if you're doing it now, go as far as Williamsburg to stay. There are places in Newport News that are plenty good to stay. Things around like the Newport News City Center, which is off the Oyster Point Road exit. It's safe to stay there. There's some restaurants, plenty of things around there. There's some shopping. You want to avoid parts of Newport News that get closer to the James River. There's not many hotels there, anyways, but the areas can be a little sketchy in parts, although there's still plenty of nice places. I think also it's worth exploring over into the Suffolk area. There's an offshoot right by the highway splits right at the Coliseum. So Interstate 64 goes down and will continue into Norfolk, and that's where all the construction is. And 664 splits off right there, and it will take you into Suffolk and Chesapeake. And there are some hotels right on the other side of the water. That would be a place I would recommend for people to check out because it's like a 15, 20-minute drive, very quiet. And anything beyond that, you're driving a good bit.
When it comes to food and places to eat, I'm getting the sense about Hampton that it doesn't have its own real personality. But if you're willing to drive, if someone going to the shows is willing to drive, any recommendations you have, even if not a specific restaurant, any sort of cuisine or anything that
Mm.
people should get while they're in Virginia before they fly home to, say, Denver, California, New York, Texas, and so on.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any place there that I could recommend as a must hit, but look, you're there by the bay. If you're not allergic to shellfish, you ought to do some seafood. Chesapeake Bay is known for oysters and blue crab primarily. If you're into fried seafood, like you can always get something like fried flounder. Is a local favorite for a lot of people. Crab cakes, that kind of stuff. That's what I would recommend to people, and that's really the thing that you can get here that you can't get everywhere. And it'll be maybe a little late in the year for crabs by the time these roll around, but you'll still be able to get a lot of that stuff. That's what I recommend because yeah, there isn't something like you would get in like Chicago or New Orleans where there's a definitive taste of the region. You get a lot of Old Bay,
Yeah, sure.
so but you can avoid that if you try hard enough too. But that's what I would recommend. There are a ton of breweries
Yeah, tell us about
down
some
here.
breweries that people should visit.
Most of the ones I prefer are on the south side of Hampton Road, so they're going to be a bit of a drive. If you are willing to take an excursion into the Norfolk area, the Vale is really good. Benchtop Brewing is really good. If you want to stay up in Hampton close by, the one that I would recommend to people is Ouzelfinch.
Can you
If
spell
you,
that?
yeah, no, please don't make me do that. It's Oozel Finch, something. They're really known for their sours. They do these things called boozy sodas too, which I'm not particularly a fan of, but they sell a lot of them. They also do some decent hazy IPAs. That's the place up in Hampton I would recommend. The others that are close by up there, I'm not gonna say anything bad about them, but I don't think that there are things you have to go out of your way for.
So when Phish announced this run, which I'm still unsure what to call it. I don't know if it's summer tour late, like the late leg of the summer tour, if it's still the summer tour, if it's, I think I've settled on their September run. I think
Yeah.
that's it. I don't think it's a fall tour. I don't think it's a summer tour.
Well, I
It,
mean, it's clearly not a fall tour because the last day of it is the last day of summer.
right, but summer tour wraps up in SPAC.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I don't know if it even matters, but they did
It
they
doesn't
did some
matter, but that's
split
what this
tours.
podcast is for.
Yeah, I mean, they did some split tours early in 3.0, where they had like a leg one and a leg two, leg one in June and leg two, July and August and things. Uh, I think now this is what we have here is like this is the model for the future. You're going to have sort of a sprawling ish, 20-date summer tour and maybe spring and either late summer or fall like run of 8, 9 shows, something like that.
Yeah, split between like three venues.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going. And honestly, for me, I like it because it does sort of cut down on the travel. You can go someplace and settle in a little bit. And for me, when I'm traveling, always that day of travel, if it's on a show day, I've got so much anxiety about like, getting there, get set up first, and you don't really ease into the show. You kind of like ram into it. And then day two, you wake up and you're like, I'm here. I can just take my time and we can roll up to the show in a more relaxed manner. So I'm here for these kinds of runs. And I know people would like to see them do more. Right now, the quality of the playing that you're getting out of them, I'm happy if it's what's making them happy. And I'm not going to be able to hit more than a few a year anyways.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, about this being the template for the future. I think it started way back in 2019. These days, moving forward, there's going to be, like you said, either in the fall or the spring, and they're interchangeable. One is going to be for the West Coast, and the West Coast in quotes here, right? Because, I don't really think that Colorado is the West Coast, but,
Right.
it could be anywhere, along the California coast down to LA, as far north as Seattle or Washington State. And then the other one, whether it's spring or fall, is going to be the Southeast, going from Virginia down to maybe Alpharetta. And there's going to be 8 or 9 shows between 3 or 4 venues interchangeably in the spring and fall in those locations. And then the summer tour is going to hit everyone else. And then there's a New Year's run, we hope.
Well, I'd be happy if they start doing some more shows at Hampton. So,
Well, of course, wouldn't we all?
let's pray for that one.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendance-bias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode. Well, let's take a look at Hampton. And I got to tell you, when they announced this, and I was already doing my venue preview episodes for the summer tour, I was getting a little nervous about Hampton. This seems like a big venue. It comes with a lot of weight. It comes with a lot of history, both with Phish and other bands as well. To me, this almost stood in my head as doing a venue preview episode about Madison Square Garden. There's just almost too much to digest. So, those of you listening, please forgive us if we don't dig too deep into every show that Phish has ever played here because there's too many. That would take its own podcast series, I think, for the Hampton Coliseum. So, briefly, an overview. If you don't know, the Hampton Coliseum is a multi-purpose arena. It was built in 1968, opened in late 1969, and from what I found, it was the first large-scale arena in the state of Virginia. And for concerts, it has a capacity of 13,800, which is the same as Forest Hills Stadium, although Hampton just feels so much bigger, maybe because it's indoors, maybe because it's in the round. I don't know. But it would take, like I just said, an entire series to list and explain all of the different teams that have called Hampton home over the years. It's been a combination of ABA, American Basketball Association teams, AHL, which is kind of the precursor to the NHL, NCAA teams, and various minor league sports. Growing up, did you go to any of those games? Did you see any athletics at the Hampton Coliseum?
Yeah, I don't remember there ever being sports teams at the Hampton Coliseum. I know there were. That we went to the Norfolk Scope probably because it was closer, and that was easier for us to get in and out of. So I was, surprised to see that I was like, wow, there was an AHL team at Hampton. I didn't know that. We went to the circus and we saw the Harlem Globetrotters and
Right, like when I was growing
concerts.
up, like I said earlier, the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, formerly the New Jersey Nets, used to play in the Nassau Coliseum when they were an ABA team. And I was shocked to find out there was professional sports, sorry, Islanders, but there was a professional basketball team on Long Island at the Nassau Coliseum because when I was growing up, it was always the Harlem Globetrotters.
Hmm. I learned something as we got ready for this to see that because I had never seen a sporting event there. It was always it was like a big traveling event. The monster trucks and stuff like that would come through there.
Right, like Disney
Um,
on Ice or
mhm.
American Idol Live, stuff like that. Professional wrestling, the WWF.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, all that kind of stuff. And then, like I said, this was one of the places where it was a regular stop for concerts. Before stadium tours, things had gotten so big that everybody was doing stadium tours. Everything came through this area, and they either played at the Norfolk Scope or at the Hampton Coliseum. You had Pink Floyd doing Dark Side of the Moon there in 1973. The Stones, Zeppelin, Elvis.
Yeah,
Michael Jackson, Madonna. Obviously, everybody knows the Grateful Dead. Played there so many times.
right.
And I
Notably, as they are formerly the Warlocks show, where they busted out Dark Star for the first time in God knows how many years, right?
Yeah, and this run of Phish shows actually is going to be what makes them surpass the Dead in terms of performances there. I think they're both at 21 shows as of right now.
It feels like a lot more because, like I said earlier, Hampton just kind of developed this reputation, and we'll get into that as we go over each Phish show. I know I've compared it to the Nassau Coliseum, but I would also put it in the same shelf as Blue Cross Arena in Rochester, Rosemont Horizon in Chicago. These like older classic venues, even Charleston, I would throw in there. These older classic venues that are in their cities to sort of serve a purpose for a more spread out population that maybe don't have a big population density, and either they're at current time kind of outdated, or at least I could say their best days are behind them in terms of infrastructure. Like, in other words, Phish this summer played the Moody Center in Austin, which opened like a year ago. And
Hmm.
on this September run, they're going to play the Coca-Cola Center in Birmingham, which at the time of our conversation now had just opened less than a month ago.
Mm.
So when you look at a place like Hampton, they don't have all the same amenities. Like you might have mentioned, the parking is a little bit different. They're more broken in. They're kind of held together by nostalgia and glue. Am I being a little too harsh?
No, you're spot on with it actually. And there have been conversations over the years where the city had talked about maybe getting rid of the Coliseum. And I think it's strong history in the sense of nostalgia that people in the area have about it that has stopped it from happening because, in Richmond, there is a Coliseum there that was built 1 or 2 years after Hampton, that is now completely defunct and falling apart. which by the way also looks like a spaceship. But for whatever reason, everything they built in Virginia, the Norfolk Scope too, they all look like flying saucers.
It has something to do with that Navy connection. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe it's like our own little Area 51. People's connection to it, it's right off the highway. When you come around the corner on 64 after coming across the bridge tunnel, it's takes up your whole field of view as you come through. And I think it's special to people even that haven't had special experiences there. Like, obviously the Phish community, we all have a close connection to it. But I think just it's something that people want to have, and they've managed to keep up with it where other similar places have been allowed to sort of fade away and eventually be replaced by bigger, more modern facilities. And you go to Hampton, there's no bells and whistles on it. I mean, it's all very concrete and sterile. There's no, screens or music being pumped into the bathrooms, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, old doesn't mean bad, and new doesn't always mean good. Speaking again about the Nets who moved to the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, right? The Barclays Center is not a really pleasant place to go see a concert, or to go, in my opinion, to go a couple years ago to an Islanders game or to a Nets game. It's very dark. It's very tall and narrow. I don't know if I would choose the Nassau Coliseum over it, but it's not necessarily that much better. For example, I remember when I went to Hampton and I walked in, I remember the smell. It reminded me of my parents' basement in their old house in Brooklyn. But it was in a weird way comforting, in a sense. It was nostalgic.
I get that feeling every time I go in to that place. There haven't been a lot of non-Phish shows I've seen in recent years there. Growing up, I saw everything there. All of the 80s hard rock and heavy metal bands and things like that came through there. And we saw Guns N' Roses there, and Slayer and Metallica. I saw Tool there, in the 2010s. To be honest with you, the sound sucked for all of it. Phish was the only band that I saw play there that sounded amazing. Like, they figured out how to use that room and play off of the slapback and stuff there. I have this deep sense of nostalgia. I think a lot of people in this area do too, because it's one of the places where we grew up, and it's where you went to see rock and roll shows.
Well, let's talk about Phish's rock and roll shows here. They have a long history at this venue. As of this conversation, they've played Hampton 21 times, so the September shows will bring that total up to 24. The first time that Phish played here was on November 25th, 1995, right in the thick of that legendary Fall 95 tour. Were you at that show?
I wasn't. I was still at the point of being a denier that they would have anything that I would ever want to know about. And I was in college at the time too, not in the area. To be honest with you, I never heard anybody talk about the show either.
Me neither. So, it's the next year that people tend to bring up, October 25th, 1996. That was right the year after they broke into amphitheaters and coliseums as like a touring model. Right in 95 was kind of their first big step up from smaller theaters. 96 is when they're like, oh, this is our routine now.
Yeah, and that was my first time going. I only had about 5 months of listening to the band. I basically had heard Picture of Nectar and Junta, and I kind of went on a curiosity because, so honestly, tickets weren't that cheap, and it was about a week before I was starting a new job, like my first career job out of college. I mean, I had a good time. Like I said, I noticed right away. I was like, hey, the sound isn't terrible. Like, I can actually hear all the instruments, which was very different from what I experienced before. But, I didn't really get like the whole appeal of Phish. I mean, I was already enjoying it, and I enjoyed my time there. I mean, they opened with Ha Ha Ha, right? Which, I mean, I don't really have a lot of memories of the show. I mean, I remember that they played Stash because that was the song that like hooked me.
Sometimes people ask me what the best rooms that we play in are. This is pretty much it for me. Just so you know, to answer your question. Good sound. Everybody gets to go wherever they want on the floor. Couldn't beat it.
and it got me started on being interested in them. But there was weird stuff in there. I didn't know. If you go in, really, nobody told me that, like, hey, the drummer wears a dress and plays a vacuum cleaner. I didn't know that there would be, like Avinu Malkeinu. I had no idea what to make of that. They ended the second set with Star Spangled Banner and then played Johnny Be Good. I was just like, okay, this must be how it is all the time. I go see him again. I don't know that this is going to be my new favorite band.
And then the next year, to me, this is what blew it all open when they played Fall 95, November 21st and 22nd, later to be released as official releases, 1997. This is what blew it all open to me. And I apologize to you and other Hampton devotees. This is what put Hampton on the map. For me, as a Phish fan especially. Like, these shows are the heart of the Fall 97 tour. That first night with Emotional Rescue, a 4-song second set that includes maybe the best AC/DC bag ever played. Night 2 opened with a Mike's Groove, which at the time was unexpected, and followed up with an all-time Harry Hood. And then the second set established Halley's Comet as a jam vehicle, and in my opinion, hasn't been equaled yet.
Yeah, I mean that's the run that everybody will forever love, and they're not wrong to. I mean, if you're somebody who doesn't like the '97 sound, okay, I can get that's probably not going to be for you, but also I don't know why anybody would feel that way. I mean that the AC/DC bag and Haley's Comet are they're standout among all the versions of the songs played, and they both have had some other jammed out versions, AC/DC bag in particular, but man, these are special. That Haley's, I agree with you. It's there's no other version that comes close to it.
Every time they start it up, I hope against hope, right? It's been however many years, however many decades since said, all right, they can jam Haley's. It can happen, but it has not happened to this degree since they did in 97.
I know, and it's sad because like I don't really love the song Haley's Comet, and so when there isn't a jam, you're kind of like, like why did you do this to me?
And then the next year, they came back on almost the same days a year later, not quite, but almost, on November 20th and 21st, 1998, which became Hampton Comes Alive, their big deluxe double show 6-disc, I think, box set, which, by the way, I don't know if it won, but it was nominated for a Grammy for Best Live Album Packaging.
Yeah. Yeah, it was also like most frustrating packaging because, if you opened it the wrong way, all the discs just like slid out. And it's a weird call for their first, big official release, right? Because I think that was like their first, full show release, if I'm not mistaken. And it's good, but there's a lot of songs on it. Set 2 of the second night is great though, right? I mean, you get the Sabotage followed by a full set Mike's Groove. I'm just like a Page fan for forever, and I love his playing in the simple. The piano in that is just beautiful. And honestly, when the show came along and I heard the show and I still didn't know all of their songs. I mean, I'd been to, I don't know, maybe a half a dozen shows at that point. I just kind of figured like, oh, ha ha ha, must be like regular rotation because like I got it, basically, twice in 2 years.
And to me, when this came out as a box set, as an album, I remember feeling underwhelmed. I know that might sound like sacrilege, but I can listen back now and appreciate these shows. But at the time, I just wanted jams and musical creativity. The first night, November 20th, has 13 songs in the first set. And I also didn't like the way it was mixed for the album. So that doesn't really speak to the show experience. But I remember very little from listening to these shows, except for the fun covers, like Getting Jiggy with It and Tub Thumping. And they opened with Rock and Roll Part 2, stuff like that. Zooming out in the big picture, this, 97 was when we realized, okay, Hampton is a special place for us as a community, inclusive of the band. Then when they released this box set in 98, it's like, oh, the band is in on it too. This is special for them. Hampton is now anointed as one of the venues not to miss Phish when it appears on a tour itinerary.
Yeah, absolutely. They cemented that in the next year too, because the Hampton Comes Alive album came out in 99. just ahead of the fall tour, right? And so when they got to the 99 shows, yeah, they had a big healthy nod to the Hampton Comes Alive, Frampton Comes Alive relationship. Those 99 shows get, everybody talks about the 17th being one of the worst shows.
Right. Just so anyone listening knows, listening to this as a history lesson, these shows were on December 17th and 18th, 99, after the fall tour, when they did just almost self-contained tour in December of 1999.
Yeah. And these were the last two shows before Big Cypress too.
But yeah. Tell about the 17th, that first night that gets a bad rap.
Well, I mean, it's not a bad show, right? They played a lot of songs that they had been playing a lot in 99, but they also played Jennifer Dances, and that's what everybody goes to. Is like, for a couple of years afterwards, it seemed like you couldn't have a conversation by Hampton without somebody complaining about that. But the next night, the 18th, like for me, that was one of those shows where it just changes you. It wasn't necessarily the playing. It was a combination of everything, right? The songs that were played, the energy in that place, in and out of it. Like even in the lot beforehand, there was like so much just pumped up anxiety. Maybe that's the wrong word, but enthusiasm. And when the lights dropped and, Fishman does his first little roll down to start Hood, and the place just went berserk. I remember points in that first set of just standing and just looking around at every single person in that place was moving. It looked like the floor was just like undulating because bodies moving in synchronicity. It was really amazing. And then that the Yim that closed the first set had this what for me was like one of my favorite vocal jams because it was more like a monk chanting kind of thing, and it was like, oh my God, we're actually about to be beamed up right now
From the Mothership.
Yeah, exactly. But the second set was like the craziest. It was my favorite 2001. They've got the Trey quoting Frampton, with making, he didn't have a talk box, but sort of like emulating that with the microphone and a wah-wah. The sand from that was just recently released on the latest live bait. That's worth a listen. But I think the best part other than the 2001 for me was the Mike's the Mike's groove that had like a Buffalo Bill sandwiched in Weekapaug. It was really awesome. A lot of good energy show. Sadly to say, I did not go to Big Cypress, so
Neither did I. So we'd have to live with these December shows in real time at the time.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't get to Big Cypress. And then there was quite a break between those 99 shows and the next time they would return to Hampton. So Phish came back, for anyone who doesn't know, on New Year's Eve 2002 at Madison Square Garden. There is one day off, and then they would play 3 nights in a row at Hampton. And I remember this being a huge deal because they rarely ever play in January, and there's rarely ever a post-New Year's run. That vocabulary doesn't exist in the Phish lexicon for the most part. So I remember it being almost a little confusing that it was like an inverted New Year's run, that New Year's started it, and then they would play 3 nights at Hampton. And I know almost nothing about these shows. Do you?
Yeah, so and it is interesting. This is like a more proof that the band finds this venue to be special. They decided to tack those 3 shows on, after the New Year's show. I only went to the last night. I could only get tickets for the last night, and I took my now wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and it was her first show. I was a little like, okay, it's not always like this. The set list was a little weird. It wasn't like the best playing. I mean, they encored with Friday. Of all things. And, I teased her for a long time because she didn't go to another show until 2013. And I was like, I know it's because of the Friday encore. It was good. The energy was there. All of the things though that were kind of starting to get like a little creepy in 2000 were still there. They were actually a little worse. And then maybe that was, I had to really convince my wife later to go to the next show. I was like, no, it's different now.
Yeah, we're all grown-ups now.
Yeah, exactly. Like most of the people have got jobs and are taking showers.
Well, not yet, because after those 2003 shows at the very beginning of that year, after Phish announced that the summer of 2004 would be their last shows ever, at the time it was true, they announced, a bunch of shows in June and then a week's worth of shows in August. And I went to almost every show in August leading up to Coventry. But one night, August 9th, 2004, if I remember correctly, it was like a last-minute addition to the final week of shows. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was not in the original announcement, and it did get tacked on. And I feel like they announced it very close to the show date, too.
They did. I remember because I went to Great Woods the following night, which would be August 10th and the 11th they played. And I remember before the show going to the bathroom and hearing people talk about how the Hampton show, I remember this. I was at a urinal where I remember the most important things of my life. But I remember people just talking over how it had good parts, but it wasn't all that good. I had a guest on my show, Jonathan Hart. He joined me for an episode of Attendance Bias where he picked this show, Hampton, August 9th, 2004 show, because he chose not to go to Coventry at that time. And this would be his, I put this in quotes, his last show. He said the vibe was heavy. That's his word. And he said it was probably the worst show he ever attended. I mean, it's good for the people who like oxy jams. It's like sloppy, unprofessional, but the crowd was lapping it up. Chalk Dust had a big jam, as do most songs in the second set. Although I remember listening to it, and to me, it's mostly like ethereal searching without much to hold on to. So this is kind of, at least in the popular imagination, kind of a unbalanced show, as most of that week was.
Yeah, and I agree with those assessments now. At the time, I really felt differently about it. I mean, that was a time in my life where I was starting a new job. I had just started a new job when they made the announcement that Cup and Tree would be the last show, and I was like, okay, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to get to these things, so I guess I'm not going to see a show. So when this was announced, I was just jazzed. Okay, I get one more to go to. The day before the show, I got engaged, and so I was like, all right, this is just going to be a time of change. I'm going to go in and enjoy it. I had a blast at the show. I mean, it was not the best concert I've ever seen by any stretch, but at the time, I didn't feel bad about it. That was the point where the jams were, they were kind of sloppy. It was like, okay, Trey would mess up something and then it would be 5 minutes of like a space jam until they could get it back on the rails, if it came back on the rails. I remember that podcast, and I remember thinking, I was like, man, I feel bad for this guy because I had such a better time at the show than he did. But listening back to it, and I did listen back after that podcast, I was like, yeah, no, I was just in a totally different headspace. And I think most people probably thought this was terrible.
That was probably true for a lot of that week, that August 2004 week. A lot of people came in with a lot of baggage and from a lot of different directions with a lot of different expectations also.
The thing I loved about it was because I think that's also the anniversary of Jerry Garcia's death. And,
it is. The 9th is, yeah.
Yeah. Before the show started, there were all these rumors that they had sound checked Dark Star, and so like the people that were around me when we got in and we were on the floor, we usually try to get on the floor in Hampton. Everybody was excited, right? And I didn't get the heavy vibe from it. Walking out was a little bit different. Now I would equate it to like a scene from The Walking Dead because it was mostly zombies walking out of there.
So that was the last show that Phish played at Hampton until the big ones. If Hampton wasn't established as I don't know, this isn't the best word, but it'll do for now, as a holy place for Phish fans in the Phish universe, it certainly would be after these 3 nights, March 6th, 7th, and 8th, 2009. In my notes, I wrote, obviously the big ones, with big in all caps. I recorded a 3-part miniseries about these shows with some of the guys from Phish.net, because these were the shows that Phish came back from their hiatus. And even at the time, it wasn't the hiatus, it was the breakup, that of all the places, they could have picked anywhere. They probably could have picked Giant Stadium. They probably could have picked any venue in the nation and it would have sold out no matter what, probably, for these 3 comeback shows. And they, again, anointed Hampton as the chosen place. And going there was almost like a Hajj. It was almost like some sort of pilgrimage.
It's a pilgrimage, yeah.
Yeah, to there. So if 97 and 98 established Hampton as a can't-miss venue, these 3 shows made it the holy place in Phish lore and kind of put it on the same shelf as MSG or The Gorge in terms of importance to the band.
Yeah, I mean, it's the place where they were reborn, right? I mean, it really is the second start to the group at that point. I'm glad you got to go to those shows.
I went to one show. I went to the 8th, the last night there.
Well, I'm glad you got to at least go to one. I did not go to any of those. I did not manage to get tickets, and I really was scared to death about what I would find for ticket prices if I went to the lot. So I stayed home. And, honestly, I wasn't really convinced that it was going to be better than 2004 at that point. I still, if I could have got tickets, obviously would have gone. I wasn't like upset about missing it until the day after the first show. And then I saw like they had opened with Fluffhead, and it was like, damn it.
And they sounded clean. It was more, I've always thought of this as more of a recital more than a typical two-set Phish concert. It was more like, hey, we're going to play songs from all over our history, and we're going to play them clean without errors to the best of our ability, and we're going to smile. And at least speaking from Trey, looking at him, he's going to look healthy too, and they're going to play with purpose. That is kind of the big takeaway if they were setting the establishment of what would become to be known as 3.0 moving forward. It set the tone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they took a few years break and they would come back in 2013. This would be the fall tour, October 18th, 19th, and 20th, 2013. Was this the year that had the ticket trees outside the Coliseum? I remember seeing one year at Hampton, everyone was blowing it up. And then when you got there, people literally could not give away tickets.
I think it was this year. It was either this year or 2018, but I think it was 2013. Because it was early in the fall tour, there was still tons and tons of speculation about Halloween, leading up to that. Everybody was looking for clues, as they were going along. I remember coming back thinking like, dude, I bet they're doing Pink Floyd at Halloween because, Trey was doing a lot of these slower solos and with big bending notes, which wasn't really something that he was known for in the 90s. And, obviously turned out not to be that at all. And it was Wingsuit, but, maybe the closest thing you could get, because that was probably the end of that song is probably their most Floyd-like thing, at the time. And Bob Ezrin ended up producing the record. It's a great run. There's some interesting stuff in there. There's a good Carini in the first night. At the time, I think that was one of the better versions ever played. And certainly since then, there have been so many great versions that I don't know that it necessarily would stand up to those. But the third night, the second set, is one of the all-timers for me. And this was one that they did one of the dinner and the movies for. And I was so thrilled to be able to watch it again. Because the Kuroda's work during the Tweezer is really, really awesome. And they had the one timer for taking care of business coming out of the Piper that nobody saw coming, but all 13,000 people there knew the words.
well, it's a classic rock favorite.
Yeah, totally. And it was such a great night. And I remember telling somebody when we left, I was like, the low point of that set was sand. And like, when did you ever say that?
Yeah, how often is that the case?
That was a really great time. And anybody that stuck their ticket in a tree, I hope somebody picked it out and went in and it had a nice night for free. Because I remember the tickets on the ground. It was crazy.
Then we took a 5-year break, or Phish took a 5-year break. And again, in the fall tour, they would come back to Hampton for October 19th, 20th, and 21st. And that was the last time that they've played Hampton up to these upcoming shows in September. So it's been 7 years. What do you remember from 7 years ago?
Yeah, this run was great. Everything in 2018 was really good, in my opinion. We were kind of coming off a curveball getting canceled, so everybody was pumped. They were glad that there was a fall tour happening. This was like near the beginning of the tour. I think it was maybe the second or third stop. And the first couple of shows were really strong leading up to it. I went with a different person every night. And then I went by myself the third night. I just had a blast. I met so many people at these shows too. Especially the last night going by mine, I always managed to find random strangers. And I remember when the Simple concluded that night, just everybody's giving each other high fives and hugs and stuff. We're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Just so ready for that energy that you get there that you don't get in every venue. And of course, all that stuff was leading up to them unleashing Casbot Boxed, at Halloween, which nobody knew about clearly, but that tour was like a freight train. It was also my daughter's first shows. Like, she didn't go with me. She was in college at the time and had decided that and had figured out that she actually liked the band. So, for her birthday, she asked, could we get her tickets? And I was like, oh, hell yes. And so I think that might be why I went solo the third night. I might have just given her the second ticket that I had on the third night. But that started her Phish adventure.
You had the ultimate opportunity to be a dad. And if you were on your own, just like stand behind them, like, hey guys, having a lot of fun tonight, and be the dad who keeps popping in on his daughter and her friends.
I don't ever want to be that guy. So I definitely did not do that.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for really racking your brain and digging all the way back almost to the beginning, right? Maybe not 1995, but at least 1996, moving forward and talking about the history of the Hampton Coliseum and the area surrounding it, what your connection to it is, giving great advice to people who are coming into town for these shows or otherwise. And I just appreciate the history lesson that this is, basically, because I'm a student of history, but even more so a student of Phish history. So thanks for pretty much being the guest lecturer today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Brian. It was fun.
And that's it for today's episode about the Hampton Coliseum. I'd like to thank Greg for joining me today, Phish.in for all of the recordings used in today's episode, Phish.net for their help with pretty much everything else, and the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do to help with children's music education. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the podcast. You can visit www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate anything you can afford. You can leave a rating and a review of the podcast anywhere you listen, and you can reach out on social media and say hello. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.